Hey guys, how's it going? Master Cal here, and today I'm going to be beginning my off-season recap series for the NFL, where I'm going to go through every team's off-season, go over some of their most notable moves in free agency, the trade market, and of course the draft. I'm going to talk about whether they address the needs that I came up with in my preview series. So we'll start with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So first up is going to be coaching changes. Jaguars fired head coach Doug Marrone after their 1-15 finish to the season. Replacing him is going to be Urban Meyer, the legendary college football coach, Bowling Green, Utah, Florida, and Ohio State, of course. And so we'll see how he does in the NFL. We'll also see if he's able to stay healthy, because health concerns were what caused him to retire from Florida and Ohio State. His offensive coordinator is going to be Darrell Bevell. Bevell most recently was the interim head coach for the Detroit Lions after they fired Matt Patricia, and he was the offensive coordinator before that. Bevell was a candidate for the Lions' full-time head coaching job, but they elected to go in a different direction, and so Bevell comes over to call the plays for Meyer. And their defensive coordinator, on the other hand, is going to be a first-time defensive coordinator. It's Joe Cullen, who was the Baltimore Ravens defensive line coach. Cullen said that their defensive scheme is going to be kind of multifaceted. Baltimore runs a 3-4 scheme primarily. Jacksonville's coming off a 4-3 scheme, but they plan to kind of use a lot of multiple fronts. 3-4 with 4-3 concepts, I think, is how he described it. So that'll be interesting to see how it goes. So next we'll go into the free agents the Jaguars were able to retain. So first off, they franchise tagged left tackle Cam Robinson. The franchise tag is worth $13.754 million. Robinson's been the left tackle for the Jaguars since they took him in the second round in 2017. However, he has not established himself as a permanent starter. He has been very inconsistent at best. He's missed time due to injuries, including especially in 2018. And a lot of people expected the Jaguars probably to move in a different direction, but it sounds like they're going to give Robinson a one-year audition to see if he can be the left tackle for them. Otherwise, they'll reevaluate the position next year. As such, I'm not expecting him to get a long-term extension by the July 15th deadline for franchise tag players. Edge rusher Daewoo Smoot was re-signed to a 2-year deal. It's worth $10 million. Up to $14 million, $5.25 million guaranteed. He's done pretty well as a rotational edge rusher who's gotten some starts in, so a nice guy they were able to bring back. Center Tyler Shatley was re-signed to a 1-year deal worth $2 million, $975,000 of it guaranteed. Shatley got quite a few starts in last year with Brandon Linder injured, and so he'll likely return as a backup. Cornerback Trey Herndon was re-signed to a 1-year deal worth $2 million. He got $500,000 guaranteed. He was a restricted free agent last year, so a little bit less than the restricted free agent tender. And he's gotten a lot of playing time for them over the past few seasons, but he may be pushed down the depth chart, so we'll have to see. Fellow cornerback Sidney Jones was also re-signed. They brought him back on a 1-year deal worth $1.75 million with $400,000 of that guaranteed. Former second-round pick of the Eagles, Jones was promoted from the practice squad, or was signed to the Jaguars practice squad after he was cut by the Eagles at final cuts before the 2020 season. Then he got promoted from the practice squad. He's dealt with injuries throughout his career, and it was an injury in college that caused him to slip in the second round, as otherwise he may have been the top cornerback in that year's class. You know, Marshawn Lattimore, Tre'Davious White, those guys. Tight end James O'Shaughnessy was re-signed to a 1-year deal worth $1.59 million, $1 million of it guaranteed. They re-signed edge rusher Adam Gotsis to a minimum salary contract, $225,000 guaranteed. Safety Josh Jones, former second-rounder of the Green Bay Packers, was re-signed to a 1-year minimum deal. Only $25,000 of it was guaranteed. He started for them last year, but he probably won't be a starter this year, as we'll get to that. Kicker Aldrick Rosas was re-signed to a minimum salary contract as well with no guarantees. Defensive tackle Daniel Ross was given a minimum salary contract worth $10,000. And they brought back all three of their exclusive rights free agents: running back Dare Ogunbonwale, linebacker Dakota Allen, and guard Derwin Gray. Now we'll get into their free agent additions. Their biggest signing was former Seahawks corner Shaquille Griffin. They signed him to a 3-year deal worth $40 million. It's up to $44.5 million, $24.5 million guaranteed. So the first two years are completely guaranteed. Griffin's been pretty good in his time in the league. He's not an elite cornerback one, but he's a very good corner nonetheless. Like he's a mid-range one, and so for that salary, it's probably a reasonable contract. Another addition to their defensive backfield, they brought in Rayshawn Jenkins from the LA Chargers. They signed him to a 4-year deal worth $35 million. It's up to $39 million. $16 million of it is guaranteed. He's gotten a lot of playing time the past couple of years because of injuries to Derwin James, and he'll now be a full-time starter with the Jags. Defensive tackle Roy Robertson-Harris was signed to a 3-year deal. It was $23.4 million up to $26.4 million, $14 million of it guaranteed. Former Chicago Bear. Robertson-Harris actually had a better 2019 than 2020 as he was banged up for a good chunk of the 2020 season. They signed receivers/return specialist and former cornerback Jamal Agnew to a 3-year deal. It's worth $14.25 million, up to $21 million. Only $4 million of it is guaranteed, however, so if it doesn't work out, they can easily move on from him after this year. Former Detroit Lion, he's one of the best return men in the game. He hasn't done much, however, as a corner or a receiver, so it'll be interesting to see if they are able to find some kind of a role with him outside of special teams, because that's kind of a hefty price to pay a special teamer. They brought another former Lions receiver, Marvin Jones Jr. They signed him to a 2-year deal worth $12.5 million, up to $16.5 million, $9 million of it guaranteed. That was kind of a surprising signing because Jones's comments throughout the offseason indicated that he was probably going to sign with a contender, or a Super Bowl contender, I should say, which the Jaguars aren't. But the familiarity with Darrell Bevell, obviously from the Lions, likely played a role in there, and he still has prime years left to where he can still make some money now and then ring chase in a few years. So, yeah. Former Panthers tight end Chris Manhertz was signed to a 2-year deal worth $6.65 million up to $7.25 million, $4.25 million guaranteed. He's known more for his blocking than his receiving. Former Niners quarterback C.J. Beathard was signed to a 2-year deal worth $5 million, $2.5 million of it guaranteed. He started at least one game every season, I think, except for 2019, which was the year the Niners went to the Super Bowl. So he's got experience there, and will be a pretty nice backup. Running back Carlos Hyde, journeyman, was signed to a 2-year deal. It's worth $4.5 million up to $6 million, $1.4 million guaranteed. This will be his second stint as a Jaguar, as he was with the Jaguars for part of the 2018 season after he was traded from the Cleveland Browns to the Jaguars after the emergence of Nick Chubb that year. Hyde would wind up being released by the Jaguars, but they're bringing him back. Obviously, it's a new regime with Trent Baalke, who was the GM with the Niners when they drafted Hyde. And also, Urban Meyer was the head coach at Ohio State when Hyde played there, so obviously there's a lot of familiarity there. Special teamer safety Rudy Ford was signed to a 2-year deal worth $4.2 million, $600,000 guaranteed, former Cardinal and former Eagle. Defensive lineman Jihad Ward was signed to a 1-year deal worth $2.5 million, almost completely guaranteed. So he follows Joe Cullen from Baltimore over to Jacksonville. Linebacker Damian Wilson, former Cowboy in Chief, was signed to a 1-year deal worth $2 million, $1.75 million guaranteed. He's a solid guy, not very good in coverage, but he'll be a nice depth piece for them. Veteran receiver Philip Dorsett was signed to a minimum salary contract with no guarantees. Dorsett signed with the Seahawks last year, but he missed all of that season because of injuries, and he hasn't lived up to the first-round pick billing. Receiver returner Pharoh Cooper was signed to a 1-year deal, minimum salary. He was just recently signed. So we'll see if he's just a depth piece given that they added Agnew. So, yeah. One of their intriguing signings is Tim Tebow, the former quarterback who's been out of the league since 2012. But he'll be coming back as a tight end. Obviously, he won a couple of national championships with Urban Meyer, so he's got that familiarity there. He also signed a minimum salary contract with no guarantees. And then they had a couple of waiver claims, linebacker Chappelle Russell from the Buccaneers and wide receiver John Vay Johnson from the Dallas Cowboys. For roster cuts, their most notable cuts were tight end Tyler Eifert, the former first-round pick of the Bengals. He signed a 2-year deal in 2020, but wasn't much of a factor last year. Cornerback Rashawn Melvin and defensive tackle Al Woods, both of whom opted out last year, were released. Melvin signed with the Carolina Panthers, and Woods signed with the Seattle Seahawks. Running back Raquel Armstead, who was a fifth-round pick in 2019. He missed all of 2020 because of a condition he developed after he contracted COVID-19. Fortunately for him, he's healthy now, and he was claimed by the New York Giants off of waivers. Another one of their draft picks they cut, Dontavius Russell. He was a 7th-rounder, I think, in 2019, and he missed all of the 2020 season due to injury. Their other cuts included Dustin Colquitt, who was basically a rental punter with Logan Cook on the COVID-19 list for the last game of the season. Edge rusher Kamalai Correa, who was on the left squad list. Cornerback Quinton Meeks, safety Doug Middleton, and linebacker Joe Giles Harris. For their free agent departures, none of their unrestricted free agents signed a deal longer than 1 year. Receiver Keelan Cole joined up the New York Jets. Quarterback Mike Glennon signed with the Giants. Defensive tackle Avery Jones and cornerback Greg Maben both signed with the Tennessee Titans. Wide receiver Chris Conley signed with the Houston Texans. Defensive tackle Karan Reed signed with the Carolina Panthers. Tight end Eric Salbert was non-tendered as a restricted free agent. He signed with the Denver Broncos. They have several unsigned free agents, including D.D. Westbrook, who's coming off an ACL tear. Running back Chris Thompson, cornerback DJ Hayden, and edge rusher Aaron Lynch also still have yet to sign. Jacksonville did 3 notable trades this offseason. First up, they acquired Malcolm Brown from the New Orleans Saints in exchange for a 7th-round pick in 2021. The Saints were going to release Brown, but the Jaguars decided to step in and acquire him for a very cheap cost. So it was basically a salary dump for the cap-strapped Saints, and because Brown otherwise he's been a pretty good player throughout his career with the Patriots and the Saints. The Saints just needed to free up some cap room. Jacksonville signed him to a new contract, 2 years, $11 million, $7.6 million guaranteed. He had just 1 year left in his current deal. Then the Jaguars traded away a couple of their most recent draft picks, so new regime looking to get their players in and get rid of the old players. Tight end Josh Oliver, who was a 3rd-round pick in 2019, was traded away to the Ravens for a conditional 7th-round pick in 2022. The reason why the return is so low is because Oliver has been injured in both of his 2 seasons in the league. I think he's only played in just 4 total games and hasn't really done much. And cornerback Josiah Scott, who was taken in 2020, a 4th-rounder that year, was traded away to the Eagles. In exchange, they acquired cornerback Jamison Houston, who's been on and off of practice squads. He did get some playing time down the stretch with the Eagles last year, along with Philadelphia's 6th-round pick in 2023. Now on to their draft picks. You had Trevor Lawrence, obviously. We knew that was going to happen for months, and they made it official, taking him with the first pick in the 1st round. And they took his college teammate Travis Etienne with their other 1st-round pick, which was from the Rams as part of the Jalen Ramsey trade. The 1st pick in the 2nd round, they took cornerback Tyson Campbell out of Georgia. They had another 2nd-round pick. They had the Vikings' 2nd-round pick because of the unique Ngakoue trade ahead of last season, and they took offensive tackle Walker Little out of Stanford. They took defensive back Andre Cisco with the 1st pick in the 3rd round. 1st pick in the 4th round, they took tackle Jay Tufele from USC. Then they traded up in the 4th round to get linebacker Jordan Smith. With the 1st pick in the 5th round, they took tight end Luke Farrell out of Ohio State. And with the 25th pick in the 6th round, they took wide receiver Jalen Camp. For extensions, as of now, they've signed 1 player to an extension. Cook, their punter, was signed to a 4-year extension through the 2025 season. It's worth $12 million. $6 million of it is guaranteed. For injuries, wide receiver Terry Godwin was placed on the injured reserve. The Jaguars didn't disclose the reason why he was on there. He was in the hospital for some reason, so HIPAA, of course, and so yeah. They said he's fine though, and I'd expect when he's fully healthy that they'll release him with an injury settlement. He was the corresponding roster move for when they decided to bring in Pharaoh Cooper. All right then. So now that I'm going to give my thoughts on how the Jaguars offseason went. So overall, I feel like they did a fairly good job this offseason. They attacked a bunch of needs. They didn't go after a lot of prime free agents. They went for a lot of good mid-tier free agents to add depth, and I think they had overall a pretty solid draft class. They actually didn't have a ton of draft picks this year. They did trade some of them away when they traded for Malcolm Brown, and then also when they traded up for Smith in the 4th round. But overall, quality over quantity in the draft, and we'll see how those guys all pan out. So as far as their specific needs, I brought up quarterback, left tackle, tight end, defensive tackle, cornerback, and safety as their main positions of need. Quarterback was definitely addressed with Lawrence. Left tackle was addressed with Cam Robinson. Again, a lot of people thought that they'd probably move on from Robinson given his struggles in Jacksonville, but they're going to give him one shot there with the franchise tag. Tight end, I do not feel like they addressed very well. They brought back O'Shaughnessy, they signed Manhertz, and then they obviously Tebow. But none of those guys really is proven, and this is probably one of the worst tight end rooms in the entire NFL. So that was a miss there. As far as defensive tackle goes, they definitely addressed that position. The defensive line was a position of emphasis this offseason for Urban Meyer and Trent Baalke, bringing in Brown and Robertson Harris and Tufeli. So that was definitely, yes, they definitely did that. Cornerback, they definitely did that as well, bringing in Shaq Griffin to be their number one, along with bringing in depth like Tyson Campbell, Trey Herndon, and Sidney Jones. Safety, yes, that was addressed with Rayshawn Jenkins. The secondary needs I mentioned were offensive line, wide receiver, and defensive end. They did not really address the offensive line aside from franchise tagging Robinson and bringing back Shatley, who's really more of a depth piece. Their offensive line is not horrible, but it could be better. As far as receiver goes, yes, they definitely addressed that by bringing in Jones, who brings a nice veteran addition to a pretty young Jaguars receiving core, especially after moving on from Cole and Conley and presumably Westbrook. And then edge rusher, they addressed that by bringing back Smoot. So I'd have to say the Jaguars. I think overall the Jaguars had a B- offseason. They didn't hit it out of the park, but they addressed needs. They brought in good players, and they should be a lot better this year. And we'll see how Lawrence does in the NFL. So I'm going to conclude this by giving my projected starters for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Obviously Lawrence will start day one at quarterback. James Robinson, despite the additions of Etienne and Hyde, will still be the starting running back. Cam Robinson at left tackle. Andrew Norwell at left guard. They restructured Norwell's contract, deleting the 2022 season, so he'll be a free agent after this season. Linder should be back at center. Right guard, I think A.J. Cann should be the favorite to start, but Ben Barch could possibly unseat him for the starting job. Jawan Taylor definitely at right tackle, so it's pretty much the same line as last year. Wide receiver, DJ Chark, Marvin Jones, and Laviska Shenault. Tight end, I'm going to list Manhertz as the starter for that, at least for now. Defensive line, again, the Jaguars are going to be doing some kind of a hybrid look defense, so I'm going to, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to stick with the 4-3 because they have both 4-3 and 3-4 guys that I imagine they'll be rotating in. So for their 4-3 alignment, it would probably be something like Josh Allen off the edge, Roy Robertson Harris and Malcolm Brown at the middle, Daewoo Smoot off the other edge, Linebacker would be Miles Jack, Joe Scobert, and Damian Wilson. Cornerback, Shaq Griffin definitely would be the 1. C.J. Henderson would be the 2, and then in the slot will probably be some kind of an open competition between Trey Herndon, Sidney Jones, and Tyson Campbell. And safety will be Jared Wilson and Rayshawn Jenkins. So that's going to do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you'll enjoy this series as we continue it later.